A museum restorer dies after being struck by the corner of a display case and wakes up in the body of a destitute orphan. In 2 weeks, a ceremony will brand his arm with a rank ranging from F to SS. He is given a 0. For 7 years, he is hounded as a system error. And then, in an abandoned chapel, he finds something that will turn that 0 into a death sentence for the entire world. Ethan Hale opens his eyes and doesn't recognize the ceiling. Gray stone, cracked, the smell of mold, a body that isn't his own. Too light, too small, thin arms, ribs sticking out beneath the skin. He sits up. Someone else's memories float through his mind. Ethan Hale, 16 years old, an orphan, a scholarship student at Silverbrook Academy, and 23 years of experience as a restorer of medieval artifacts from the world where he had just died. The night shift at the Boston Museum, a slippery floor, the corner of a shelf against his temple, and a strange, heavy medallion with an inscription he couldn't read in any language. Then, darkness. Then this ceiling. He looks at the back of his right hand, empty, no scar, no mark. And this is where the worst begins. In this world, magic is measured by letters on the skin. In 2 weeks, he'll place his hand on the stone of origin, and it will brand his rank. From F to S. S. A single letter will decide everything. His body remembers this fear. It remembers how the boys in the dorm brag about their parents' ranks. B, A, S. The higher the letter, the wider the smile. Ethan stands up. His legs buckle from hunger. He walks down the academy corridor, and his restorer's eye catches on the details. The stone in the lower masonry is older than the building itself. Much older. Someone built Silverbrook on top of something ancient. The pattern on the tapestry echoes a motif from Egyptian sarcophagi. It doesn't copy it. It echoes it, as if both cultures drew from the same source. The world is falling apart. You're dead. You're in a stranger's body. And you're standing there, examining the weave pattern. In the dining hall, he listens to the teenagers. One is afraid of getting an F. He says it's better to die than to go home with an F on his report card. No one laughs. Ethan recognizes that look. He saw it in the mirror, in a past life. For 2 weeks he goes to the library and looks for a catch. The Stone of Origin has been working for 300 years, and everyone believes it is objective. Ethan doesn't believe anything that has been working for 300 years without verification. Something in this system is put together wrong. He senses it, but there is no proof. The day of the ceremony. The sun shines through the stained glass windows of the Hall of Seals. 112 students, names in alphabetical order. Each places a hand on the stone. The mark appears. The hall gasps or falls silent. A. Applause. C. Silence. F. A boy walks out of the hall without looking back, and no one follows him. 70 of the 112 children receive a C or lower, and they accept it like the weather, like gravity. They call him up. Ethan Hale. He places his right hand on the stone. The stone is warm, smooth. He waits. Nothing. The stone doesn't glow at all. The hall falls silent. The master asks him to remove his hand and place it again. Nothing. The silence thickens. And then, slowly, a symbol appears on his skin. Not a letter, a number. 0. Round. Dull. The master takes a step back and says that this doesn't happen. Rank 0, not F, not E. The absence of magic is such. The hall erupts in noise, and Ethan looks at his 0 and thinks one thing. The stone wasn't wrong. The stone told the truth. Just a truth that no one here knows how to read. They don't expel him right away. A scholarship student cannot be expelled without a council decision. But from this day on, he becomes invisible. The professors stop calling on him. His classmates move seats. The cook gives him smaller portions. 1,000 little things add up to one message. You don't belong here. Ethan endures. He knows how to endure. In his past life, he worked for 8 years at a museum where his work was signed under someone else's name. For 7 years, he has been sitting in Silverbrook on a temporary basis. Every year, the council renews his scholarship by a single vote. Old Professor Morden is the only one who speaks to him like a human being. In his 5th year, Morden dies. The votes are tied. In his 7th year, Professor Cassius Vale submits a request for expulsion. The council votes, 6-5. Ethan is given a week to pack. The last day. Rain. He stands in the courtyard with a small wooden chest. All he has. 2 shirts, 1 book, his mother's silver locket. A stranger's mother. But over 7 years, the difference has faded. He remembers how she smelled, like grass and bread. The cast-iron gate closes with a heavy creak. He should feel rage, or despair. But he has already survived his own death. This is just a dismissal. He walks through the city past people with BAS brands. Not a single one looks his way. Rank 0. Invisible. By evening, he spends the night under a bridge. In the morning, he wanders along the road without choosing a direction. An hour later, he sees a turnoff to the forest. A white wall looms behind the trees. An abandoned chapel. And the stone in its masonry is the same as in the lower tiers of Silverbrook. The same era, the same hand. He enters. The altar is split in 2. The shifted half reveals a niche in the floor. An object lies in the niche. Black. Matte. A cube the size of a palm. The restorer inside screams. The engraved lines are too fine for a hand, too smooth for magic. The pattern doesn't appear in a single catalog from his 23 years of work, and the material absorbs light instead of reflecting it. He's seen something like this once in his life. That very medallion in the museum. That very evening. That very corner of the shelf. His heart is pounding. He touches the cube with his fingertip. The air flares. A translucent grid of cells unfolds in the air like a hologram. Hundreds of empty squares. A line glows in the center. He reads it twice. The god's inventory system is activated. Keeper identified. Welcome. Ethan kneels before the shattered altar and stares at the glowing interface. Then at his own brand. 0. Then back at the interface. And for the first time in 7 years in this world, he smiles. Not out of joy, out of recognition. He had spent his whole life working with things others considered dead. Shards, fragments, rusty iron. And every time he saw in them what they once were. Whole, alive. This cube had just told him that there was a whole world of such things here. Broken, forgotten, waiting. He placed the cube in a small chest next to his mother's medallion. One thing from the past, another from the future. And he stepped out of the chapel into the morning light. The city greeted him indifferently. Ethan walked through the lower streets where the houses stood closer together and the roofs sagged with age. This is where the artisans lived, the farmers, the porters, people with D and F ranks, those whom Silverbrook spat out every year. He didn't know where to go. He had 3 copper coins. He had no food at all. The inventory interface hung at the edge of his vision like a translucent shadow. The moment he thought of it, the grid of cells became clearer. All the cells were empty. All except one. A small icon in the lower left corner. Ethan focused on it, and a card unfolded before his eyes. Midwife Serena's clay jug, 3rd century before the fall. Water left inside for a day relieves gray fever in children under 10. Condition: damaged. Restoration required. Keeper's condition for acquisition. Give away something he didn't want to part with. Ethan read the card 3 times. Then he closed the interface. Then he opened it again. Gray fever. He'd heard that name before. In the Silverbrook Library, gray fever, a childhood illness, treated with the priestly magic of House Ivorn. 100 gold pieces per visit. For the lower city, that's 3 years' wages. Children were dying from a disease that could be cured with a single visit from a priest, simply because the visit cost was too expensive. Ethan clenched his teeth and walked on. By noon, he found a pawn shop. A small shop with an iron grate on the window, a sign with peeling paint. He went inside. Behind the counter sat an old man with a magnifying glass on a string. A woman stood in front of the counter, young, thin, red-eyed. She was talking to the owner of the neighboring herb shop, who had come in on some business. The woman was asking him to sell her the medicine for less. The herbalist replied that the price couldn't get any lower. Then he added that it wouldn't help anyway, that her daughter had gray fever, that she needed a priest from the House of Avorn. 100 gold. The woman fell silent. Her hands hung limply at her sides. She stood like a person who had just heard a death sentence. Ethan stopped at the door. The interface flashed. The card for midwife Serena's jug popped up on its own. The keeper's condition. To give away something he didn't want to part with. He looked at the medallion in his hand. Silver. The initials E.H. The last thing from his mother. The only thread connecting him to this body's past. To the woman who smelled of herbs and bread. He stood there, thinking. 23 years ago, in another life, he had been a man who couldn't say no, who gave away his time and health because someone else was in need, who died alone in an empty museum because he had given himself away entirely. He knew where this path led, and he knew he couldn't stand by and watch as a woman went to bury her daughter. Ethan walked up to the counter. He placed the locket in front of the old man. He asked him to appraise it. The old man took the medallion. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at it through the glass. He named a price. 8 copper coins. Poor silver. Rough workmanship. Ethan nodded. 8 copper coins. His mother's life in coins. The interface flashed. The keeper's condition fulfilled. Item available. Midwife Serena's clay jug. Condition requires restoration before first use. He felt it. Not in his hands. Deeper. As if a pocket had appeared in the air next to his palm. Warm. Quiet. The jug was waiting inside. Ethan turned to the herbalist. He asked if he could buy some plain, clean water from him. The herbalist looked at him strangely. He nodded. He named a price. 2 copper coins. Ethan paid. He received a simple clay jug of water. Now he had to make the switch. He turned away toward the wall, closed his eyes, reached into his inventory. Serena's little jug slipped into his hand like a sigh. Soundless, without a flash. It was simply in his pocket, and then it was in his palm. Small, cracked. The clay was reddish. Ethan looked at it through the eyes of a restorer. A crack along the rim, a chip on the bottom, traces of mineral deposits inside. The 3rd century before the fall. This thing was over 1,000 years old. He ran his finger along the crack, closed his eyes, saw how the little jug had once been whole. A midwife poured water from the well into it. She placed it by the bed of the woman in labor. By morning, the water had changed. Not magic as Airterra understood it, something quieter, something older. The object remembered why it had been made. Ethan remembered along with it. The crack beneath his finger closed, not instantly, slowly, just as a wound heals on a living body. The chip on the bottom smoothed out. The surface became even, warm. The little jug was whole. Ethan poured the water from the purchased jug into Serena's little jug. Then he poured it back into the ordinary vessel. The water had passed through the artifact. That should have been enough. He turned to the woman. She was still standing at the counter, staring into space. Ethan held out the jug to her, told her to give her daughter 1 sip in the morning, just 1. The woman looked at him, at his hand with the 0 brand, at the jug. She asked who he was. Ethan said he was nobody, just a man with a jug of water. If it didn't help, he'd pay her back for the medicine out of his own pocket. He didn't know where the money would come from. He had 4 copper coins left. But he said it, and saw something change in her eyes. Not hope, something smaller, a willingness to try. She took the jug, nodded, left. Ethan stood in the pawn shop with empty hands. No medallion, no money. With 4 copper coins and Serena's empty little jug, which quietly returned to the inventory. A message appeared on the card. 12-day cooldown. For 12 days, the little jug would be dormant. For 12 days, Ethan would be exactly what everyone thought he was. A nobody. He stepped out onto the street, sat down on a step, sat there. 4 pennies, no place to stay, no food, no plan. He laughed. Quietly, hoarsely. In his past life, at least he had a paycheck when he gave himself away for free. Here, he started in the red. He got up and walked through the lower quarter, looking for work. Any work. He asked in shops, in workshops, in taverns. Everywhere, the same thing. They showed him the finger. They showed him the brand. They said they didn't take zeros. Or they silently closed the door. By evening, he had visited 23 places. 23 rejections. He sat down on a stone bench by the fountain at the end of the street. The fountain wasn't working. A stone basin cracked down the middle, moss on the walls. Ethan looked at the crack. A professional reflex. The basin was old, from the same era as the chapel walls. The pattern along the edge was almost worn away, but Ethan could see it. The same lines, the same hand. The city was built on the bones of something greater. Everywhere he looked, there were traces, stones, patterns, debris, a whole world of broken things under the feet of people who didn't notice them. On the 3rd day after his healing, a woman came to the fountain where Ethan had spent the night. The very same one. She was crying, but she was crying differently than at the pawn shop. She said the fever had gone away, that her daughter had woken up in the morning and asked for food, that the fever had subsided overnight, that the neighbor's doctor didn't believe it and said it was impossible. Ethan nodded. He asked her daughter's name. Mary. She's 6. The woman's name was Kim. She sold ribbons at the market. Kim asked how she could thank him. Ethan looked at his hands. They were dirty, chapped from the cold. He said he needed a place to stay for a couple of nights if she knew of anywhere. Kim paused. Then she said she knew a widow who rented out a room. Inexpensive. Herbalist Nona Song on Crooked Street. Ethan remembered the name. Nona Song's house stood at the end of Crooked Street. A narrow 2-story house squeezed between a laundry and a candle shop. A dark stone facade, small windows, pots of dried herbs on the windowsills. Ethan knocked. A woman of about 38 opened the door, tall, lean. Her dark hair was pulled back into a bun. Her eyes were calm and appraising, like those of a person who had long since stopped being surprised. Ethan said he was looking for a corner, that Kim from the ribbon row had sent him. Nona looked at his hand, at the 0. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She asked how much money he had. Ethan held up 4 pennies. Nona said a spot cost 10 pennies a week. Ethan said he could work, fix things, anything. She asked what exactly he knew how to fix. Ethan looked at the pots of dried herbs on the windowsill, then at the broken door hinge, then at the crooked shelf in the entryway behind her. He said those 3 things for a start. Nona looked at him for a long time. Then she stepped aside and let him in. The corner turned out to be a storage cubby under the stairs. A narrow bench, a coat hook, a small window at ground level. Ethan set his trunk on the floor. He sat down on the bench. The ceiling was so low that the top of his head brushed against it. It smelled of dried herbs, basil, mint, something bitter he couldn't identify. A soft tapping came from behind the wall. Nona was grinding something in a mortar. A rhythmic sound. Calm. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time in 3 days, he had a roof. Walls. The smell of a home that wasn't his but felt real. He fell asleep to the sound of the mortar and slept for 14 hours. In the morning, he fixed the hinge, then the shelf. Then he repotted the herbs, adding fresh soil from the yard. Nona watched silently. When he finished, she set a bowl of porridge and a mug of herbal tea in front of him. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything. She just set it down. Ethan ate slowly. The porridge was with butter and honey. The tea smelled of mint and something floral. It was the best meal he'd had in both of his lives. Not because of the taste, because of the feeling. Someone had made it for him. Not because they had to, not because he'd paid for it, but because he'd fixed 3 things, and Nona decided he deserved a hot meal. After breakfast, she asked where he was from. Ethan said he was from Silverbrook, that he'd been kicked out. Nona nodded as if she heard that every day. Maybe she did. Then she asked what the story was with the jug of water and the girl named Mary. The lower city is small. Rumors spread fast. Ethan said he'd just given the child some water. Nona looked at him with that same lingering gaze. She said that water doesn't cure gray fever. Ethan said that sometimes it does. Nona didn't argue, but her eyes said she'd remembered. A week passed. The rumor about the 0-rank boy who'd cured a girl with water from a jug had spread throughout the lower quarter. People came to Nona's house. Not in crowds, one by one, 2 at a time. They peeked into the yard. They asked about Ethan. Some brought broken things. A pot with a chipped handle, a knife with a loose handle, a lock that was sticking. Ethan fixed them, with ordinary hands, without the inventory, without magic. Just the hands of a man who had worked with fragile things for 20 years and knew how to handle a tool. People paid with whatever they could. Eggs, bread, a coil of rope, a candle stub. Ethan stored it all in the storage room under the stairs. Nona stopped charging him rent for the corner. At the end of the 2nd week, a girl came to see him. Tall, thin, hands red from work, an F branded on the back of her hand. She said her name was Una Park, that she had a former maid, that she'd been fired for breaking a family vase, that she'd heard about a guy who fixes things at the herbalist's house on Crooked Street, that she had nothing to fix, but nowhere else to go. She spoke quickly. She swallowed her words. She didn't look him in the eye, but at the floor. Ethan poured her some tea. Una took the mug and almost dropped it. She caught it at the last moment. Her hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from habit. She'd been dropping things her whole life. Her whole life she'd heard that she was clumsy and slow. Ethan watched her hands. The way she held the mug. Her fingers moved quickly, too quickly for an ordinary person. Not clumsiness. Rhythm. A different rhythm. The world moved at one pace and Una at another. She didn't drop things because she was clumsy. She dropped them because her body operated at a frequency this world wasn't calibrated for. Ethan finished his tea. He said she had a place to stay for the night. Una looked at him, then at Nona, who was standing in the doorway. Nona shrugged and said there was another corner in the house, and that the girl could help in the kitchen if she didn't break all the dishes. Una broke the first plate the next morning, the second one an hour later. Nona stood at the stove and looked at the shards on the floor. Her face was stony. Una crouched down and gathered the pieces with trembling hands. She mumbled that she'd pay for it, that she'd fix it, that she was always like this. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched. He saw it. Una picked up the plate with a normal motion. She set it on the table. But at the last moment, her fingers sped up, as if an internal metronome had gone off by half a beat. The plate slipped. It fell. It shattered. Una's whole body would jolt as if from a blow. He walked over to her, asked her to stand up. He asked her to pick up the mug from the table. Yuna picked it up. The mug wobbled but stayed upright. Ethan asked her to put it back. Yuna put it down. The mug clattered against the table and bounced. Ethan nodded. He asked her to do it again, but with her eyes closed. Yuna looked at him as if he were crazy. Then she closed her eyes. She picked up the mug. She set it down, perfectly, steadily, without a single unnecessary movement. Yuna opened her eyes and looked at the mug, then at her hands, then at Ethan. He said she wasn't clumsy, that her hands were working correctly. It was just that her eyes and hands operated at different rhythms. When she saw that an object was almost in place, her eyes sent a command to speed up. Her hands obeyed and overshot. Without her eyes, her hands did everything on their own, at the right pace. Yuna was silent. Then her lips trembled. Ethan turned away so he wouldn't have to watch. Nona quietly left the kitchen. For the next 3 days, Ethan worked with Yuna. He gave her simple tasks. Rearrange the pots on the shelf. Pour water from one pitcher to another. Slice bread. All with her eyes closed. Yuna did everything perfectly. As soon as she opened her eyes, everything fell apart. Ethan thought. He wasn't a magician. He wasn't a healer. But he knew things. He knew how they fit in the hand, how weight was distributed across the palm, how the angle of inclination shifted the balance point. In his past life, he had selected tools to fit the hand of every intern at the museum. Some needed a scalpel with a thick handle. Someone needed one with a thin handle. Someone with a curved one. No two hands are alike. He asked Yuna to bring him all the kitchen items she used most often. Yuna brought them. 3 plates, 2 mugs, a knife, a cutting board, a wooden spoon. Ethan picked up each item and looked. Not at the item, at Yuna. How she reached for it, how she gripped it, where her fingers rested, where they slipped. The knife handle was too smooth for her quick fingers. The mugs were too light. The plates were too flat around the edge. Everything was made for hands that move in a standard rhythm. Yuna wasn't standard. He spent 2 days in the shoemaker's workshop next door. He arranged to have 3 pairs of boots repaired. In exchange for payment, he gained access to the tools and scraps of leather. He shaped the knife handle. He wrapped it with twisted cord. He made a ridge for her thumb. He weighted the mug with a lead sinker at the bottom. He wrapped the plate handles with a thin strip of leather for grip. Little things. No magic. Just a custom fit for specific hands. Yuna took the knife. She cut the bread. Smoothly, without flinching once. She picked up the mug, set it down. Picked it up, set it down again. She did this 20 times in a row. On the 21st time, she turned to Ethan and said she hated him. Her voice was wet. Ethan nodded. He knew what that meant. Nona watched all of this from her armchair by the window. She didn't ask any questions. But in the evenings, when Yuna was already asleep, she would sit in the kitchen with Ethan and drink tea. In silence. Sometimes she spoke. Short sentences. About the weather. About prices at the market. About how the neighbor's cat had fleas again. Not once about the jug. Not once about Zero. On the 4th evening, she said that her husband had also fixed things. Not objects. People. He was a herbalist. He treated people for free in the lower quarter. Those whom official doctors wouldn't take. Those who had nothing to pay with. 10 years ago, people from the Order of Pure Mana came to him. They said that treating people without a license from the priestly guild was heresy. Her husband didn't stop. A month later, they found him in an alley. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. Nona spoke in an even voice, without tears. The tears had long since dried up. She said that after his death, she closed the pharmacy. She put away all his things, everything except one. A copper samovar in which he brewed herbal mixtures according to a family recipe. The samovar stood in the attic, wrapped in a rag. She couldn't throw it away. She couldn't look at it. Ethan nodded. He said he understood. Nona looked at him. She said no, that he didn't understand, that he was too young to understand. Ethan didn't argue. He was 23 in his head and 16 on his face. She was right and wrong at the same time. The next day, when Nona went to the market, Ethan went up to the attic. He found the samovar. He unwrapped the rag. The copper had darkened. The handle was loose. The spout was stuck. There was a dent on the side. Ethan picked up the samovar. It was heavy, solid workmanship, hand-forged. He turned it over and saw the craftsman's mark on the bottom, a small letter C inside a circle. Master Song. Nona's husband had made this samovar himself. Ethan sat down on the dusty attic floor and held the samovar on his lap. The inventory interface was silent. No cards, no systems. This wasn't an ancient artifact. It was an ordinary copper samovar, made by an ordinary person for an ordinary purpose. To brew tea for those who were feeling unwell. Ethan didn't need a system to see what this thing meant. He saw it with his own eyes, a restorer's eyes. He saw the chip and saw how the samovar should look when whole. He worked for 3 hours. He straightened the dent with a wooden mallet wrapped in cloth so as not to leave new marks. He fixed the spout, secured the handle, cleaned the copper with a mixture of vinegar and salt he found in Nona's pantry. By evening, the samovar was gleaming, not like new, like well cared for, like an object someone remembers. Ethan carried it downstairs. He placed it on the counter of the former pharmacy by the entrance. He put a clean rag next to it. He said nothing. He went back to his little room. In the morning, a scent woke him up. Herbal, bitter, familiar. He stepped out of the cubbyhole. Nona was standing at the counter. The samovar was boiling. In her hands, she held a tin can of dried herbs. Ethan saw her face. She wasn't crying. Her face was calm. But the hands with which she poured the herbs into the teapot moved as if they'd done it 1,000 times. Muscle memory. A 10-year hiatus, and her hands still remembered. She didn't turn around, didn't look at him. She said only one thing, that the pharmacy door needed a touch-up. Ethan nodded. He went to look for paint. 3 days later, Nona Song's pharmacy opened. For the first time in 10 years. Rumors spread. The lower quarter is small. Everyone knows everyone. A strange guy with no rank who cured a girl with water, who fixes things with his hands, who lives with the herbalist's song, whose former maid no longer breaks dishes. People came. They brought broken things. Ethan repaired them, slowly, carefully, treating every item as if it were his last. He didn't take money. He took whatever was offered, food, materials. Once, someone brought an old armchair with a sagging seat. Ethan reupholstered it in a day. He placed it in Nona's yard. That evening, Nona sat in the chair and drank tea from a samovar. Una swept the yard and hummed. Ethan sat on the step and looked at the sky. Orange from the sunset. A quiet evening. No magic. No artifacts. Just a yard. Just people. He caught himself thinking that he felt good, and immediately he was frightened by that thought, because he knew what happens next. When you feel good, you relax. When you relax, you start making promises. When you make promises, you start to owe. When you owe, you start to break. He didn't want to break again. But Una's voice humming something meaningless, the sound of Nona's mortar behind the wall, and the scent of herbs were doing their work. He sat there in silence and allowed himself to just be. Just be. Ethan figured out the nature of Una's awkwardness and adapted kitchen items without magic to suit it. He learned the story of Nona's husband, whom the Order of Pure Mana had killed for practicing free medicine. He restored the copper samovar belonging to Nona's late husband, and after that, she opened her apothecary for the first time in 10 years. The first month in the lower quarter was drawing to a close. Ethan sat in the cubbyhole under the stairs, sorting through the inventory cards. Serena's little jug was still asleep. The cooldown would end in 2 days. But the system had woken up. 3 new cards had appeared over the past week. All required restoration. All required the keeper's conditions. The first, the bone needle of the weaver Malin. The 6th century before the fall. Fabric sewn with this needle does not tear or get wet. Condition, repair someone else's work and do not put your name on it. Second, the stone mirror of the soothsayer Duan, the 5th century before the fall. It shows not the face but the mood of the beholder. Condition, tell the truth to a person who does not want to hear it. Third, the wooden measuring spoon of the archivist Gelna, 2nd century before the fall. A liquid measured with this spoon does not lose its properties during storage. Condition, to refuse a lucrative offer for the sake of an uncomfortable but correct decision. Ethan read the cards and thought. The system did not grant artifacts for feats, not for slaying monsters, not for victories in duels, for human choices, small ones, quiet ones, the kind that no one would see or appreciate, except the system itself. In the morning, a carriage pulled up to Nona's pharmacy. Not a wealthy one, but not a poor one either. Middle-class nobility. A man in his 50s stepped out of the carriage, wearing a dark cloak with a coat of arms on the shoulder. A small house against the backdrop of a tower. A minor, noble family. Ethan had seen such coats of arms on portraits in the corridors of silver. The man looked around. He grimaced at the smell of the lower quarter. He went inside. Nona greeted him calmly. The man introduced himself, Lord Taylor Bracken, head of the Bracken household. He'd heard that a master craftsman who repairs old things lived here. Nona called for Ethan. Lord Bracken looked him up and down. A boy, skinny, rank 0. The Lord pulled a package from under his cloak. He unwrapped it. A locket, gold, finely crafted. The chain was broken. The clasp wouldn't open. The Lord said it was a family heirloom of his lineage, that the locket hadn't opened in 100 years, that the city's best jewelers had tried and failed, that one of them said the lock was sealed from the inside and couldn't be opened without Class A magic. Lord Bracken had spent more on jewelers and mages than the medallion itself was worth. But inside is a portrait of his great-grandmother, the only one. He wants to see it before he dies. He is ill. A year, maybe 2. Ethan took the medallion. Heavy. Old gold, not cast but forged. He turned it in his fingers. He looked at the lock through a magnifying glass he'd borrowed from Nona. The lock was simple, a spring mechanism, but something was jammed inside. Ethan held the medallion to his ear. He shook it gently. A sound. A small, dry click. Something inside had broken off and jammed the mechanism. He asked the Lord for an hour. Lord Bracken sat in an armchair in the courtyard. Nona brought him tea. The Lord drank and looked out at the courtyard with the expression of a man who didn't understand how he'd ended up there. Ethan went into the storeroom. He laid the medallion on a rag. He took out a thin needle. He began to work. The problem wasn't with the lock. Inside, a fragment of the lid's hinge had broken off and was wedged across the spring. Mages had tried force. Jewelers had tried to pry it open. No one had thought to simply pull the fragment out. Ethan worked with the needle through the slot in the lock, millimeter by millimeter. His hands remembered. 20 years of restoration. Hundreds of hours with a magnifying glass and a scalpel. 40 minutes later, the fragment popped out. A tiny piece of gold, the size of a grain of rice. The spring clicked. The lid opened. Inside was a portrait, a miniature on ivory. A young woman with dark eyes and a serious face. Ethan closed the locket. He stepped out into the courtyard. He handed it to the Lord. Lord Bracken opened the lid. He looked at it for a long time. His face didn't change, but the hand holding the locket trembled. He closed the lid. Asked how much. Ethan named the price. 10 silver coins. The Lord looked at him, said that jewelers charged 2 gold coins just for the attempt. Ethan said he wasn't a jeweler. The Lord took out his purse, counted out 10 silver coins. Then he added 5 more. He said it was for tea. He turned and walked toward the carriage. He stopped at the door. He turned back. He said he would tell his friends about the craftsman. Ethan nodded. 15 silver coins. That was more than he had earned in an entire month. That was 2 weeks' rent for a decent room. That was 30 meals. Nona stood in the doorway and looked at the coins in his hand. She said the apothecary needed a new mortar. Ethan gave her 5 silver coins. She took them silently, as if it were normal. The interface flashed. The keeper's condition. The bone needle of the weaver Malin. To repair someone else's work and not put your own name on it. Ethan looked at the medallion that had left in the carriage. He had repaired it. He hadn't signed it. He hadn't asked the Lord to reveal who exactly had done the repair. The Lord decided on his own. The system accepted it. The needle's card lit up. Item available. Condition requires restoration. Ethan took the needle out of his inventory. Small, bone, yellowed with age. The tip was broken off. A crack barely visible to the eye ran its entire length. The 6th century before the fall. More than 1,200 years. He held it in his palm and felt something resonate inside. Not magic. Memory. The needle remembered the hands that held it. Malin the weaver. He closed his eyes. He saw. A woman at her loom. A dark room. The light of an oil lamp. The needle flying through her fingers. The fabric beneath her becoming as thick as leather. It doesn't get wet. It doesn't tear. Clothes for fishermen. For those who go out to sea. Malin sewed for those who might not return. Ethan opened his eyes. He ran his finger along the crack. The bone was warm, alive. The crack had closed. The tip had healed. The needle was whole. He wondered who needed it, not just anyone, specifically. The artifact works at full power only when used for its intended purpose. A bowl for new mothers cannot be turned into a battle cup. A needle for fishermen's clothing cannot be used for embroidering pillows. It needs someone who sews clothes for people who might not return. He thought for 3 days. On the 4th day, Una cut her finger with a kitchen knife and asked Nona for a bandage. Nona gave her a rag and told her to wrap it up. The rag was old and fell apart after an hour. Una wrapped it with a fresh one. That one came undone too. Ethan watched. Nona spread her hands. There were no proper bandages. The fabric in the lower quarter is cheap and rotten. He remembered that Nona had once mentioned the candlestick maker's wife from the next street, that she sews for the hospital in the lower city, that the hospital pays peanuts and the fabric tears after the second wash, that the wounded lie in bandages that come undone and their wounds fester. Ethan went to the candlemaker's wife. Her name was Meg Torrin, a small woman with tired eyes and calluses from a needle on every finger. He held out a bone needle to her. He said it was a gift. That fabric sewn with this needle doesn't tear or get wet. Meg looked at him as if he were crazy. She took the needle, tried it on a scrap of fabric, sewed a stitch, pulled on it. The fabric didn't give. She tugged harder. The stitch held. She wet the stitch. The water ran off without being absorbed. Meg looked up at Ethan. He said only one thing, that the needle was for those who sew for people who might not return. The bandages at the hospital are fine. Meg pressed the needle to her chest and said nothing. Ethan left. Behind his back, Meg was already taking out the fabric. That evening, Nona asked where he'd been. Ethan said he'd given the needle to the candlestick maker's wife. Nona asked what kind of needle. Ethan said a bone one. An old one. Nona looked at him. For a long time. Then she said he was a strange boy. That ordinary people don't give away valuable things for free. Ethan replied that he wasn't ordinary. That he was a nobody. Nona snorted. It was the first time she had almost smiled. A week after Lord Bracken's visit, another nobleman came to Nona's house. Then another. Then two at once. All with old things. All with broken mechanisms and jammed locks and tarnished silver. Ethan repaired them. Without magic. With his hands. Money piled up. He bought tools, real ones, a set of fine needles, tweezers, a magnifying glass on a stand, small vise, a hammer with a leather head. He set up a corner in the entryway as a workspace. He hung a lamp. He laid out a clean cloth. Una swept up the shavings and handed him the tools. She was excellent at it. Her quick hands turned out to be perfect for fine work. She never dropped anything when she knew why she was holding it. One evening, when all the orders had been completed, Ethan sat at the table drinking tea. Nona was washing the dishes. Una was drying them. A quiet house. Warm light. Ethan looked at his hands, at the lines on his palms, at the lines on his palms. These hands had repaired 27 things in a month, without magic, without rank, without a system, just with his hands. He thought that in this world there was no word for what he did. Restorer. Here it wasn't a profession. Here it's nothing. But people came. They brought broken things. They left with them whole. And they came back again. It meant something, even without a word, without a rank, without a label. He finished his tea. He washed the mug, put it back in its place, carefully, the way people who know its value put things away. Ethan repaired Lord Bracken's century-old medallion with his bare hands, without magic. This brought him his first serious earnings and a noble clientele. He received and restored the bone needle of the weaver Malin. He gave the needle to Meg Torin, a seamstress who sews bandages for the hospital in the lower city. He set up a workshop, and Una became his assistant. At the end of the second month, Ethan heard a name that made him stop. Jihi Seo. Una brought this name back from the market. She said there was a girl in glasses standing in the square, yelling at passers-by and showing a notebook with some diagrams. That the guards had already approached her twice. That she was saying that pre-Doran magic exists and that Silverbrook Academy is lying. That passers-by were laughing, but she kept shouting. Ethan set down his cup. He asked what she looked like. Una described her. Short, skinny. Dark hair down to her shoulders. Round glasses. 3 notebooks under her arm. Dark circles under her eyes like someone who hadn't slept in a week. A C branded on her arm. Ethan stood up and went to the market. He found her by the fountain in the central square of the lower quarter. Una hadn't exaggerated. Jihi was standing on an upside-down crate, talking to thin air. A ring of about 15 onlookers surrounded her. Most of them were smirking. 2 guards stood off to the side, looking bored. Jihe spoke quickly. The words poured out like peas. She said that the rank system was based on oppression, that before the 7 houses, a different kind of magic existed, that artifacts from the dungeons proved it, that the Department of Theoretical Magic was rigging research results. She waved her notebook and pointed at diagrams that no one could make out from 10 paces away. Ethan stepped closer. He looked at the diagrams, and inside him, everything froze. Jihe had drawn a structural map of magical flows, a rough one, with errors, but the basic principle was correct. She had drawn what Ethan had seen in the inventory, a grid, cells, connections between objects. She didn't know about the inventory. She'd arrived at this theoretically, through books and calculations and sleepless nights. Ethan stood there looking at her and thought that in another life, she would have been a professor. In this life, she was standing on a box, shouting into the void. The crowd began to disperse. Guards approached and said it was time to wrap things up. Zihe climbed down from the box. She clutched her notebooks to her chest. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from hunger. Ethan had seen that look of exhaustion before. When a person forgets to eat because the mind is more important than the body. He walked over. He said he'd seen her diagrams, that the third layer of the grid was drawn incorrectly, that the connection nodes should run not horizontally, but in a spiral. Zihei turned to face him. She looked at him through her glasses. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She asked how he knew about the third layer. Ethan said he'd seen it. She asked where. He said he'd show her if she agreed to eat. Zihei opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, asked who he was. Ethan showed her his hand. 0. Zihei stared at the brand, then at him, then back at the brand. She said that rank 0 was theoretically impossible, and that he was either an anomaly or a fake. Ethan said he was an anomaly, and that the porridge was getting cold. He led her to Nona. Nona looked at Zihei, at the notebooks, at the dark circles under her eyes. She set a double portion of porridge and tea in front of her. Zihei ate greedily. She swallowed without chewing. Then she stopped. She looked at Ethan. She told him to prove he wasn't a charlatan, that if he proved it, she would stay and work for free. Ethan thought. Showing her the inventory meant trusting her. He had known this girl for 10 minutes, but he knew her ways. He knew she had spent years on work the whole world considered pointless. He knew she had been expelled from the academy for thinking correctly. He opened the inventory. A translucent grid of cells unfolded in the air before him. Zihei dropped her spoon. Nona turned away toward the stove and pretended not to see anything. Yuna peeked out from behind the door and immediately hid back inside. Zihei stood up. She walked over to the interface. She reached out her hand. Her fingers passed right through the hologram. She turned to Ethan. Her eyes were huge. She said it was impossible. That this was the structure she'd written about in her dissertation. That her father had said it didn't exist. That the department had laughed at her. That she'd spent 2 years in isolation because no one believed her. Ethan nodded. He said he believed her. Zihei sat back down. She finished her porridge in silence. Then she took out a notebook and began writing. Zihei stayed. Nona set aside a corner for her next to Yuna. For the first 3 days, Zihei didn't leave the room. She wrote. She calculated. She drew diagrams. Ethan brought her food and left it by the door. On the 4th day, she came out with a notebook filled to the last page. She said she had a theory, that the gods' inventory wasn't an artifact, but a fragment of an ancient civilization's operating system. That the cells weren't storage, but a catalog. That the system didn't provide items, but recalled them. Every object exists somewhere in the world, physically, but it is hidden or damaged or forgotten. The inventory displays its card, and when the condition is met, the object materializes for the keeper. Not out of thin air, from oblivion. Ethan listened, and felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. She was right. He knew it not with his mind, but with that very instinct of a restorer that had never failed him. Things are not created. Things are recalled. All the magic of this world is built on power. All the magic of the ancient civilization was built on memory. Zihei asked who he really was. Ethan said he was a former scholarship student with a 0 rank. Zihei said she wasn't talking about rank, that his knowledge didn't match the education of an orphan boy from Silverbrook, that he looked at things like a person with a different set of categories. Ethan remained silent. He couldn't tell her about Boston, about the museum, about the medieval artifacts and his master's degree in the dating of sacred objects. But he could tell her part of the truth. He said he saw things differently than others, that when he held an object, he saw not only its condition, but its history, what it was made for, who had held it, what it meant. Zihei looked at him. Then she nodded. She said that was enough, for now. A week after Zihei's arrival, a girl came to Nona's house. A little girl, about 6 years old, dark hair, skinny, a rolled-up sheet of paper in her hands. Yuna opened the door. The girl asked if she could see the man with the jug. Yuna called for Ethan. He came out. The girl looked up at him. He recognized her eyes. Mary, the girl he had cured of gray fever during the first week. Mary handed him the paper. Ethan unfolded it. A drawing, childish, in pencil, a house with a smoking chimney. In front of the house, a figure of a man holding a pitcher. Next to him, a small figure of a girl. At the bottom, a signature in crooked letters. Thank you. Ethan held the drawing and said nothing. Mary said her mom, Kim, had died. 2 weeks ago. A cough that wouldn't go away. Not gray fever, just a common cold that ate away at her lungs because there's no decent doctor in the lower neighborhood. Mary is living with her aunt now. Her aunt drinks. Her aunt doesn't need her. Mary said this in a steady voice, no tears. Children who have already lost everything don't cry. They just speak. Ethan crouched down in front of her. He looked her in the eyes. He knew he should say he was sorry, that life is unfair, that everything will be okay. But he couldn't lie to a child who already knew it wouldn't be. He asked if she still knew how to draw. Mary nodded. She said she draws all the time, that her aunt scolds her because paper costs money. Ethan stood up. He went into house. He came out a minute later with a blank sketchbook, one of the 3 that Ji-hye had brought. Ji-hye stood in the doorway and watched. Ethan didn't ask for permission. He handed the sketchbook to Mary. He said it was hers, that she could draw whatever she wanted in it, that when it was finished, he would find more. Mary took the sketchbook with both hands. She pressed it to her chest, just like Meg held a needle. The same gesture. People who receive something and are afraid it will disappear. Ji-hye, behind Ethan's back, quietly said she had 2 more notebooks and that one would be enough for her. Ethan turned around. Ji-hye looked away. She adjusted her glasses. She went into the room. The interface flashed. Duan the fortune teller's stone mirror. The condition. To tell the truth to a person who doesn't want to hear it. Ethan looked at the flashing card. He hadn't fulfilled the condition. Not yet. But the system seemed to be warning him. Soon. Mary was still standing in the doorway with her notebook. She asked if she could come here to draw. Ethan looked at Nona. Nona shrugged. She said one more mouth at the table wouldn't hurt. Mary came in. She sat down in the corner. She opened her notebook. She started drawing. Yuna brought her a mug of milk. Ji-hye moved her papers to make room. Nona returned to the mortar. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched the room slowly fill with people he couldn't refuse. Inside, a familiar pang. Fear. He'd been down this road before, given himself away, broken. But now something was different. She didn't ask. Yuna didn't ask. Ji-hye didn't ask. Mary didn't ask. They just came, and stayed, and started doing things for him in return. Nona cooked. Yuna cleaned. Ji-hye did the math. Mary drew. It wasn't like in his past life. In his past life, he gave, and nothing was returned to him. Here, they gave back. Clumsily, without asking, but they gave back. That evening, Ethan sat down at the table and unfolded a city map he'd found in Nona's storage room. Old, yellowed, but accurate. He traced his finger around the empty buildings in the lower quarter. A former dye house on the corner of Chestnut and Crooked. 2 stories, a wide courtyard, large windows, closed 3 years ago after the owner's death. He asked Nona how much it would cost to rent such a space. Nona named the price. 2 gold coins a month. Ethan had 43 silver coins. He needed 1 gold coin. He looked at the map, then at his hands, then at the workshop behind him, at Yuna, who was wiping down the table, at Ji, who was writing formulas, at Mary, who was sleeping in a chair, curled up like a kitten, at Nona, who was washing the mortar. He said he wanted to open a shop in a month. Nona asked what kind. Ethan said a repair and tea shop. Nona looked at him, then at the samovar, then back at him. She didn't say anything, but Ethan could tell she understood. The gold was found 3 weeks later. Lord Bracken sent a note with a messenger. His wife, Lady Helen Bracken, wanted to have a music box repaired with a musical mechanism. The box had belonged to her mother. The mechanism had been silent for 40 years. Ethan went to the Bracken's house, a small mansion in the middle of town, not luxurious but clean. Lady Helen turned out to be a woman with a soft voice and anxious eyes. She placed the box on the table. Rosewood, mother-of-pearl inlay. The lid opened, but the cylinder inside wouldn't turn. Ethan looked inside. The problem was with the mainspring. Metal fatigue. The spring had lost its elasticity over time. A simple repair wouldn't do here. A new spring of exactly the same caliber was needed. He asked Lady Helen if there was a watchmaker in town. She said there was. Master Alden on Guild Street. Ethan went to see Master Alden, an old man in an apron with pockets full of gears. He looked at the box. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the hallmark. He said he didn't service zeros. Ethan placed a silver coin on the counter. Master Alden looked at the coin, then at the box, then at the coin again. He said the spring would be ready in 2 days. Money solves the problems that rank creates. 2 days later, Ethan picked up the spring. He sat down at the table at Nona's. He worked for 4 hours. He replaced the spring. He oiled the mechanism. He straightened the pins on the cylinder. Each pin was responsible for one note. 32 pins. 32 notes of a melody he didn't know. When the last pin fell into place, Ethan closed the lid and turned the key. The mechanism came to life. A quiet melody filled the kitchen. Nona stopped with a knife in her hand. Una froze with a rag. Jihei looked up from her notebook. Mary stopped drawing. The melody was simple. A lullaby. Something very old and very warm. Ethan listened and thought that for 40 years this song had been silent inside the wooden box. For 40 years, someone had remembered it but couldn't hear it. Now they could. He took the box to Lady Helen. She opened the lid, heard the melody, closed her eyes. She stood like that for a minute. Then she opened her eyes, and they were wet. She paid 2 gold pieces. Ethan said he'd asked for 1. Lady Helen said the second was for the lullaby. 2 gold pieces. Renting the dye house cost 2 gold pieces a month. He now had exactly enough for 2 months. 2 months to earn enough for the third. He went to the building's owner, an old merchant named Harold Finn, fat, sweaty, counting every penny. He looked at Ethan, at the brand. He frowned. He asked what he planned to do in the dye house. Ethan said he'd be repairing things. Finn asked if he had a license from the Craftsmen's Guild. Ethan said no. Finn said it wasn't possible without a license. Ethan said the license cost 5 gold pieces, which he didn't have, but that he would pay 2 months' rent in advance. Finn thought it over. 2 gold pieces in his hand right now, or an empty building that hadn't brought in any income for 3 years. Finn took the money. He said that if there was no payment in 2 months, he'd throw Ethan and everything inside out. Ethan nodded. The dye shop was in poor condition. The roof was leaking in 3 places. The floor on the 2nd story was rotten. The windows had no shutters. The yard was overgrown with weeds. But the walls were sturdy. Old stone. The same kind found everywhere in the lower quarter. The same kind used in the chapel and in Silverbrook's foundation. Ethan stood in the middle of the empty 1st floor hall and saw. Not what was there, what would be. A workbench by the window. Shelves for tools. A spot for Una by the stove. A corner for Jihei with her notebooks and diagrams. A small table for Mary with paper and pencils. A counter by the entrance. Nona's samovar on the counter. He saw all of this as clearly as he saw a whole object by looking at a fragment. Restoring a space. The same principle. To see how it should be. And to make it. They worked for 3 weeks. Ethan repaired the roof. Una hauled boards and swept the floor. Jihei figured out where to put the partitions so that light from the windows would fall on the work table. Nona came in the evenings with food and silently painted the walls. Mary painted the sign. The letters were crooked, the colors were bright. The repair and tea shop. Ethan hung the sign above the door and stepped back 3 paces. He looked at it. Crooked, bright, lively, perfect. Nona brought the samovar. She set it on the counter. The copper gleamed in the morning light. Ethan looked at the samovar and thought, this is it, the beginning. Not an academy, not a guild, not a house of great magicians. A shop. Repairs and tea, for those who have nowhere else to go. The first day of business was quiet. 3 people came in. An old man with broken glasses, a woman with a torn dress sash, a boy of about 12 with a wooden toy whose head had fallen off. Ethan repaired. Una handed him tools. Nona poured tea for everyone who came in, for free. Ethan didn't argue. He understood why she was doing it. Tea is a door. A man comes in to have a knife repaired. He sits down, he drinks tea. He starts talking. He tells how the knife came from his father, that his father died in the winter, that the knife is the only thing left. Ethan listens. He repairs it. He hands it back. The man leaves with a whole knife and the feeling that he was heard. That's worth more than 3 copper coins for the job. By the end of the first week, 20 people had visited the shop. By the end of the second week, 40. Word of mouth worked better than any sign. A 0-rank kid who fixes everything, who doesn't overcharge, who pours tea and listens. In the lower quarter, this was unheard of. Artisans charged a fortune and looked down their noses. Mages didn't stoop to everyday trifles. And here was a rankless boy who sits on the floor next to you and fixes your pot as if it were the most important thing in the world. People flocked to him. They brought not just things. They brought stories. They brought pain. They brought loneliness. Ethan took it all in, and every time he felt that same sting. Familiar. Terrifying. He was needed again. He promised more than he could deliver again. He was taking on other people's burdens again. But every evening when the shop closed, and Nona set a plate of dinner in front of him, and Una chatted about the customers, and Jihui shared new theories, and Mary showed him her drawings, he felt something that hadn't been there in his past life. They were giving back to him. Not because he asked, because they wanted to. It was unfamiliar. It was scary. But it was real. At the end of the 3rd week, Ethan was sitting at the table after closing time, sorting through the inventory cards. The system was still waking up. New items appeared every few days. Most were damaged. Most required conditions he couldn't yet fulfill. But one card caught his attention. Kenneth the Watcher's bronze lantern. 1st century before the fall. The fire inside does not go out in the wind and does not burn the hands. Reveals hidden inscriptions on surfaces within a 10-step radius. Keeper's requirement. To illuminate what someone is hiding in the darkness. Ethan read and thought. To illuminate what someone is hiding. Not literally. The system never spoke literally. It spoke in metaphors that became actions. He closed the interface and went to sleep. He dreamed of a chapel, a cube, light, and a voice that spoke a word he couldn't make out. Ethan repaired Lady Bracken's music box and earned 2 gold pieces. He rented an abandoned dye house and, in 3 weeks, converted it into the repair and tea shop. The shop began operating and attracting residents of the lower quarter. A card for Watchman Kenneth's bronze lantern appeared in his inventory, with the condition to illuminate whatever someone is hiding in the dark. The Order of Pure Mana arrived in the shop's 6th week of operation. Ethan had been expecting this. Not this specific visit, but something like it. Too much talk, too many people, too many words like miracle and healing and 0 rank in the same sentences. In a world where magic is regulated and healing is licensed, such words attract the attention of those who are supposed to be watching. The priest arrived in the morning. Alone, without an entourage. This surprised Ethan. He had expected a squad, a delegation, an official document with a seal. Instead, standing at the door was a man of about 45 in a simple gray robe with the Order's emblem on his chest. A silver flame within a silver circle. His face was weary. His back was straight. In his right hand a cane, not for show, for support. He limped on his left leg. The man introduced himself. Brother Dominic Weiss, the Order's overseer for the lower quarter. He had come to investigate reports of unlicensed magical activity. His voice was even, professional, not hostile but not friendly either. Ethan invited him in. Nona was already put the tea on. Brother Dominic sat down at the table. He looked at the counter, at the tools, at the shelves with repaired items waiting for their owners, at Mary, who was drawing in the corner, at Una, who was washing cups. He asked where the magical artifacts were. Ethan said there were no magical artifacts here, that he repaired ordinary things with ordinary hands. Dominic asked about the girl with the gray fever. Ethan said he'd given her water. Dominic asked how water had cured the gray fever. Ethan said he didn't know, that it might be a coincidence, that maybe the fever wasn't gray. Dominic stared at him for a long time. Ethan held his ground. He was lying. He knew he was lying. Dominic knew it too. But technically, there was nothing to pin on him. There was no magic in the shop, no artifacts in sight, just tools and tea. Dominic drank his tea, silently, for a long time. Then he spoke. Not like an inquisitor, like a human being. He said that his mother lived alone in the upper quarter, that she was 72, that her joints ached so badly she couldn't hold a cup, that the priestly healers of House Ivorn had prescribed her an ointment that cost a gold piece a month, that the ointment helps for 3 hours, that his salary is enough for the ointment or food, one or the other. He chooses the ointment. Ethan listened. Dominic fell silent. He looked at his tea. Then he said that his mother has a cane, a wooden one, an old one. It once belonged to his father. His father had carved it himself from ash wood. Beautiful work. But the handle had split, and his mother couldn't hold on to it. And there was no one to carve a new cane. Ethan stood up. He asked for the cane to be brought. Dominic looked at him. For a long time. Then he nodded. He said he would bring it tomorrow. He brought it the next morning. The cane was beautiful. Ash wood, darkened by time. The handle shaped like a curved branch. Dominic's father was a skilled carver. But the handle had split along the grain. Glue wouldn't help. The wood was old and brittle. Ethan thought for 2 hours. Then he came up with an idea. He didn't glue it. He wrapped the crack with thin copper wire. He wove it into the grain of the wood so that it looked like part of the pattern. The copper held the wood together, and it made the handle thicker, more comfortable for sore hands. He added a soft leather wrap to the area where the fingers rested. The cane became heavier but more stable. For a person with sore joints, that's more important than lightness. Ethan handed the cane to Dominic. He didn't take any money. Dominic stood there holding his mother's cane and said nothing. Then he asked how much. Ethan said it was nothing, that it was for his mother, not for him. Dominic looked at the cane, then at Ethan, then back at the cane. He said he would write in his report that no magical activity had been detected, that the shop operated within the bounds of craft law, that no further inspection was required. Ethan nodded. Dominic left. He turned around at the door. He said that if anyone from the Order came again, Ethan should send for him. He would handle it. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched as the priest of the Order of Pure Mana walked down Crooked Street with his mother's cane in his hand. The first secret ally. The interface flashed. The card of the fortune-teller Duan's mirror. The condition. Tell the truth to a person who doesn't want to hear it. Ethan closed the interface. He knew the condition would find him soon enough. Conditions always found him. He didn't choose the moment. The moment chose him. 3 days later, the moment came. Ji-hee hadn't slept for the fourth night in a row. Ethan could see it. The circles under her eyes had turned black. Her hands were shaking. She drank cup after cup of tea and wrote, wrote, notebook after notebook. The diagrams grew more complex. The lines grew thinner. The letters grew smaller. Ethan watched. He knew this pattern, not from other people's stories, from his own experience. When work becomes not a process but an escape. When you're not exploring but hiding. When a notebook is not a tool but a wall between you and what hurts. On the fifth morning, Ji-hee dropped the cup. Not like Yuna. Not because of quick hands. Because of exhaustion. Her fingers simply opened. The cup fell. It shattered. Ji-hee stood and stared at the shards. Her face was blank. Ethan approached. He sat down next to her on the floor. He was silent. Then he said what she didn't want to hear. He said she wasn't seeking the truth, that she was seeking approval, that every diagram, every theory, every sleepless night wasn't science, but a letter to her father that she couldn't send, that she wanted to prove herself not to the world, but to him. Archmage So, the man who had publicly disowned her, that as long as she worked for him, she would destroy herself, because his approval was impossible to obtain. Not because he was a bad person, but because he himself is broken, just as she is. Ji-hee was silent. For a long time, Ethan waited. He didn't know how she would react. She could walk away. She could strike out. She could shut herself off forever. She began to cry, quietly, without a sound. Tears streamed down her cheeks and fell onto the shards of the cup on the floor. She said she knew, that she had always known, that her father had written works on Durango magic before he became an archmage, that she had found his drafts in the basement of their house, that he had thought just as she did, exactly the same way. And then he renounced it all for the sake of his career. And when she came to him with those same ideas, he saw in her not a daughter, but a mirror. And he shattered the mirror because he couldn't bear to look into it. Ethan nodded. He said he knew something else, that there were traces in the inventory. The artifact cards contained references to research, to names, to those who studied the ancient civilization before it was banned. The name Seo appears, not the archmage, someone earlier, 2 generations ago, Ji-hee's great-grandfather. He was one of the last to read the language of the remembrancers. Ji-hee raised her head. She looked at Ethan. Her eyes were red, wet, but something new had appeared in them. Not hope, direction. She said that if this was true, then she hadn't been working for her father's sake. She had been working for her great-grandfather's sake, for the line that stretched across generations, for something greater than the approval of a single broken man. Ethan said, "Yes, that's exactly right." Ji-hee wiped her face with her sleeve. She stood up. She gathered the shards of the cup. She went to sleep, for the first time in 5 days. The interface flashed, the keeper's condition fulfilled. The stone mirror of the prophetess Duan is available. Ethan took it out of his inventory. Small, round, a dark stone with a smooth surface, a crack running from the edge to the center. He ran his finger over it, closed his eyes. He saw a woman by the hearth. She was looking into the mirror and seeing not her own face but colors. Red, blue, green, warm, cold. The colors of mood. The mirror remembered. The crack closed. The stone became smooth, warm. Ethan placed the mirror on the table. He wondered who needed it. An object that shows a mood. Not a face, not the future. A mood. For whom is this most important? For someone who can't understand what they're feeling. Mary, the girl who doesn't cry, who speaks of her mother's death in an even voice, who draws smiling people but doesn't smile herself. 6 years old. She's already lost everyone. She's already learned to be unobtrusive and invisible. Ethan waited until evening. When Mary was sitting in her corner drawing, he approached, sat down next to her, held out a small mirror, said it was for her, that if she looked, she would see a color, that the color meant how she felt. Mary took the mirror, looked. The surface lit up, dark blue, then black. Mary looked at the color, then she looked up at Ethan. She asked what dark blue meant. Ethan said it meant sadness. Mary looked at the mirror again, then she placed it on her lap. Then she cried, quietly, for the first time in front of him. Ethan didn't hug her. He didn't say everything would be okay. He just sat there beside her. Yuna quietly approached. She sat down on the other side. Nona stopped in the doorway. Ji-hee looked up from her notebook. 4 people gathered around a girl who had finally let herself cry. Mary cried for 10 minutes. Then she wiped her face. She looked in the mirror again. The color had lightened. Dark blue. She looked at Ethan. He said it was better now. Mary smiled for the first time. A small, crooked smile. Ethan would remember that smile forever. 3 months had passed since the expulsion. The repair and tea shop was open every day. During that time, Ethan had repaired more than 200 items. Knives, locks, jewelry boxes, clocks, tableware, furniture, tools, jewelry, toys. He took every item in his hands and saw it. Not just the breakage, the story. But he couldn't tell every one. Some stories were too quiet, some too loud. He learned to separate one from the other. Ji-hee helped him organize them. She started a separate notebook where she recorded every item that passed through Ethan's hands. Material, age, type of damage, method of repair, the owner's reaction. She was looking for a pattern, and she found it. Objects made for a specific person broke differently than mass-produced ones. They broke at the point of connection, where the person and the object came into contact most often. The handle of a mug, the clasp of a bracelet, the blade of a knife near the handle, as if the object grew weary from love rather than from use. Ethan listened to Ji-hee's theories and thought about the rank system. The stone of origin determined magical power. The letter on the hand, measurable power. But what if power wasn't the only form of magic? What if the ancient civilization knew other forms? Forms that don't glow or thunder, that work through the connection between a person and an object, through memory, through intention, through what cannot be measured by a stone. Ethan's 0 rank meant the stone found no mana in him, but the inventory system did. So another scale existed, another measure, invisible to the present world. Ji-hee jotted this down in her notebook with a triple line, underlined it, circled it, put 3 exclamation marks. Ethan said that exclamation marks prove nothing. Ji-hee said they help her think. Rumors about the shop reached the middle quarter. The nobles began to visit more often. Not all were like Lord Bracken. Some came out of curiosity, some out of contempt. One young aristocrat walked in and tossed a broken silver brooch onto the counter. He said to have it repaired by evening. He didn't say hello. He didn't look him in the eye. Ethan picked up the brooch. He examined it. High-grade silver, fine craftsmanship, the master's hallmark on the clasp. A renowned jewelry workshop in the upper quarter. The problem was the pin. It had bent and jammed. A minute's work. Ethan straightened the pin. He returned the brooch. The young aristocrat tossed a copper coin onto the counter. He left without saying thank you. Yuna watched him go with the look of someone who wanted to hurl a cup at the back of his head. Ethan shook his head. He said that a copper coin is just a copper coin, and that a person who doesn't know how to say thank you is poorer than someone who has no money. But there were others. An elderly lady brought in an ivory fan with torn silk. She explained that it was a gift from her husband, that he had died 20 years ago, that the fan was the first thing he had ever given her. Ethan stretched new silk over it. He matched the color. He restored the tassel on the handle. The lady opened the fan, and a shadow passed over her face. Not sadness, recognition. She said it smelled the same. Ethan didn't understand. She said the silk smelled just like it did the day her husband gave it to her. Ethan said nothing. He hadn't done anything to the scent. Maybe his hands remembered. Maybe the object remembered. The lady paid 5 silver coins and left with a fan that smelled of the past. At the end of the 3rd month, a person Ethan hadn't expected walked into the shop. Alyssa Morgan, captain of the Lower Quarter City Guard. He'd heard of her. Everyone in the Lower Quarter had heard of her. The only officer who doesn't take bribes. Tall, upright, hair tucked under a steel helmet, a bee branded on her arm, a serious face, attentive eyes. She walked in and surveyed the shop with the gaze a guard uses to examine a crime scene. Slowly, methodically, noting every detail. Then she looked at Ethan. She said she wasn't there on official business, that she had come as a customer. She pulled something out from behind her belt. Small, metal, a badge. A guard's breastplate, bent, tarnished, with a dent in the middle. She placed it on the counter. She said it was her brother's badge, rank D. He died 2 years ago in the dungeon of Dark Ravine. A squad of SS mages had taken him on as a porter. Disposable. A creature in the dungeon struck the line where the porters were standing. The SS mages were unharmed. 4 porters died. Her brother was one of them. The official report stated that they had died heroically. Alyssa said that was a lie. That they had been placed in front as human shields. That the SS mages knew the creature would strike the front line. That the porters were expendable by definition. Her voice was even. Not a single unnecessary emotion. But the hands resting on the counter were clenched into fists so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Ethan picked up the badge, he and his fingers. The metal was warm from her body. The dent was deep. The blow had been strong. He closed his eyes. He ran his finger along the metal. A restorer sees not only the damage, a restorer sees the moment of the damage. Ethan saw it. A dungeon, darkness, a scream, a flash. A young man in a guard's uniform stands in the front row with a heavy backpack on his shoulders. 10 paces behind him, 4 figures in shining robes. SS mages. They know what lies ahead. They put the porters in front. Not by accident. Calculated. The guy turns around. He manages to see the mage's face behind him. The mage looks away. Then a blow. Then silence. Ethan opened his eyes. He couldn't tell Alyssa what he'd seen, couldn't explain how he knew, but he could fix the badge. He worked for an hour, straightened out the dent. He cleaned the metal, polished it to a dull sheen, not to new, to the way the badge looked on the last day a living person wore it. Then he pinned it to a safety pin. He handed it to Alyssa. Alyssa took the badge. She looked at it, for a long time. Then she looked at Ethan. She asked how he knew what the badge looked like. Ethan said that things remember. Alyssa was silent. Then she said she believed it. Not him. Things. She pinned the badge to her breast pocket, under her uniform, where no one would see it. She asked how much. Ethan said nothing. Alyssa said she wasn't used to owing anyone anything. Ethan said it wasn't a debt, that it was a repair, that he fixed things. It was his job. Alyssa stood there. She watched. Then she nodded. She said she kept an eye on things in the lower quarter, that if the shop ran into trouble, she'd know. She left. Her steps were heavy, straight, just like her. The interface flashed that evening, a new card, the protective bracelet of the field medic Aaron, the 4th century before the fall. The bracelet's owner receives a warning 3 heartbeats before the nearest physical threat, the keeper's condition. To protect the one it would be easier to leave behind. Ethan read the card and thought of Alyssa's brother, of the porters in the dungeons, of the people put in front because they're expendable. A field medic's bracelet, a threat warning, for those on the front lines, for expendable resources. He closed the interface. The condition would come when it came. For now, he had a badge on the counter, repaired, clean, and a female guard who, for the first time in 2 years, allowed someone touch the memory of her brother. Lyra Ivorn appeared without warning, like a storm on a clear day. Ethan was standing behind the counter, polishing a brass hinge, when the door opened and a girl stood in the doorway, smelling of expensive soap and privilege. 17 years old, silver hair down to her shoulder blades. The bearing of someone who had been taught since childhood that the world belonged to her. An SS brand on the back of her hand. The 2 letters glowed gold even in the dimly lit shop. She was dressed in a simple travel dress, without any crests, but the fabric gave her away. And her shoes. And the way she stepped over the threshold. She didn't walk in, she stepped over, as if the shop floor might soil her. Una saw her first. She froze with a rag in her hand. Then she looked at Ethan, then back at Lyra. Mary kept drawing without looking up. Ji-hee looked up from her notebook and squinted. Nona came out of the kitchen with a pitcher in her hand. She looked at Lyra. She looked at Ethan. She went back into the kitchen. Lyra Raw stood in the doorway and looked at Ethan. He looked at her. He remembered her. 7 years at Silverbrook. Lyra Ivorn. The youngest heiress of House Ivorn, the top student, a genius, the golden child. She was a year younger than him, but everyone knew who she was. Everyone knew her name, her rank, her surname. At his expulsion ceremony, she sat in the 3rd row, the only one who didn't laugh. Lyra said she had been looking for him for 3 weeks, that rumors about the Zero who fixes things in the lower quarter had reached the academy, that she hadn't come from the academy, that she had come on her own. She took an object, wrapped in a silk scarf, out of her bag, unwrapped it. A wooden flute, small, a child's, plain wood, no decoration, teeth marks on the mouthpiece. A child's. One of the keys was broken off. The body was cracked all the way down its length. Lyra placed the flute on the counter. Her hands were completely still. Her face, too, but not her eyes. She said it was her flute, that she had played it when she was 7, before the ceremony, before her rank, before she was discovered as a genius and taken to Silverbrook. That on the day of her departure, she had left the flute at home. That when she returned a year later, her room had been converted into an office. All her childhood belongings had been thrown away. Everything except the flute. She found the flute in the attic, broken. Someone had stepped on it, or thrown it against the wall. She kept it for 7 years. Couldn't throw it away or fix it. Instrument makers said it would be easier to make a new one. Lyra didn't want a new one. She wanted this one. Ethan picked up the flute. The wood was light, maple, well dried. The crack ran along the grain, clean, no splinters. Someone had struck the flute against something hard. One blow, precise, intentional. He didn't step on it or throw it. He broke it. Ethan looked at Lyra. She didn't know that. Or she knew but didn't want to know. He didn't say anything. Not now. He'd ask when the time was right. Lyra said she'd wait. Ethan said the repair would take 3 days. Lyra nodded. She turned toward the door. She stopped. She turned back. She said she remembered the day they expelled him. That she had wanted to stand up and say it was wrong. That she hadn't stood up. Ethan said he knew. Lyra left. For 3 days, Ethan worked on the flute. It was the most difficult repair he had ever done in this world. Not technically. Technically, a crack in wood is just glue and a clamp and patience. The difficulty lay elsewhere. The flute was a musical instrument. It wasn't enough to just glue it back together. It had to sound right. The crack in the body altered the resonance. Even perfectly glued wood sounds different from a solid piece. Ethan glued it, clamped it, dried it, removed the clamp, blowed into it. The sound was lifeless, dry, lacking that warm tone that wooden flutes have. He tried again, and again. On the second day, he sat on the workshop floor and stared at the flute. Jihei approached. She asked what was wrong. Ethan explained. A crack in the wood is a break in the fibers. Fibers conduct sound. Glue does not. It can seal the crack, but cannot restore sound conductivity. Jihei thought for a moment. Then she asked, "What conducts sound better than wood?" Ethan looked at her. Bone. Bone conducts sound. He remembered. The bone needle of the weaver Malin. He had given it to Meg Torin. But the principle. Bone remembers sound. In the ancient civilization of the Rememberers, everything remembered. The material remembered its purpose. Ethan stood up. He went to the butcher at the market. He bought a thin cow bone for a penny. He returned. He carved a thin plate out of it. He glued it into the crack in the flute. Wood and bone. Two materials that remember. One remembers the warmth of wood. The other remembers the vibration. He clamped it. He dried it. He removed the clamp. He blew into it. The sound was different. Not like before. Neither worse nor better. Different. Deeper. Warmer. As if the flute hadn't just sounded, but had spoken after a long silence. Ethan repaired the broken key from a scrap of the same maple. He fitted it. He polished it. The flute was... Lyra came on the third day. Ethan placed the flute on the counter. Lyra picked it up, brought it to her lips, closed her eyes. The first note filled the shop. Soft, high, clear. The second note, the third, a melody. Simple, childlike. A lullaby she had played at the age of 7. Her fingers remembered. 10 years had passed, yet her fingers remembered. Yuna froze in the kitchen doorway. Nona stopped with a cup in her hand. Jihei set down her notebook. Mary looked up from her drawing. 4 women and 1 girl listened as the heiress of House Ivorn played a lullaby on a flute that had been broken for 10 years. Lyra played for a minute. Then she stopped. She lowered the flute. She opened her eyes. They were wet. She said the sound was different. Ethan said yes, that the flute had grown up, just like her. Lyra looked at him, then at the flute, then at him again. She asked how much. Ethan said 1 silver coin. Lyra said that was too little. Ethan said a flute for a 7-year-old girl shouldn't be priced too high. Lyra placed the silver coin on the counter. Then she placed a second one next to it. She said the second one was for the sound. She turned at the door. She said she'd be back. Ethan nodded. Yuna waited until the door closed. Then she turned to Ethan and said he was an idiot. That an SS-rank heiress of a great house was standing right in front of him, crying, and he was taking just 1 silver coin. Ethan said 2. Yuna snorted. She said that 2 silver coins for the tears of the heiress of House Ivorn was an insult. Ethan said he didn't trade in tears. He repaired flutes. Yuna fell silent. Then she said quietly that Lyra was beautiful. Ethan said nothing. Nona, behind the wall, chuckled so loudly it could be heard through the wall. Lyra Avorn, heiress of House Avorn with an SS rank, came to the shop asking to have a child's flute repaired. Ethan worked on the repair for 3 days and found a solution by gluing a bone plate into the crack. Lyra played the flute for the first time in 10 years and cried. She promised to return. Lyra returned 4 days later, then 3 days later, then 2 days later. She didn't bring anything in for repair. She would come in and sit in the corner. She drank tea. She watched Ethan work. Sometimes she talked with Jihei about magical theory. Sometimes she sat silently next to Mary, who was drawing. Yuna treated her with suspicion that poorly masked something else. Nona treated her like everyone else, calmly, with tea. Lyra came every time in a simple dress. No coats of arms, no jewelry, no entourage. As if she wanted to be nobody. As if she were tasting what it's like when no one recognizes you. On her fourth visit, she brought a book. An old one, a thick one, in a leather binding. She placed it in front of Jihei. She said she'd found it in the library of the House of Avorn, that it was a treatise on the fundamentals of magic written 100 years before the ceremony of awakening, before the rank system was introduced. Jihei opened the book. Her hands were shaking. She read the first page, then the second. Then she looked up at Lyra, as if at a person who had just given her air to breathe. Lyra shrugged. She said that there were thousands of such books in the Ivorn library, that no one read them, that they had been gathering dust on the shelves for 300 years. Jihei pressed the book to her chest, just as Meg had pressed the needle and Mary had pressed the notebook. The same gesture. Ethan saw it for the third time. People who get what they've been waiting for their whole lives. Ethan worked and watched. Lyra was changing. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter. There was a lot of the House of Ivor in her. Pride, a habit of power, a habit of seeing everyone around her as inferior. But here in the shop, those habits were slipping. Yuna didn't look up at her from below. Yuna looked at her straight in the eye and said what she thought. Nona didn't make her any special tea. Nona made one kind of tea for everyone. Mary didn't know what the House of Ivorn was. To Mary, Lyra was just an ant with silver hair who sat quietly. Jihei saw in her not an heiress, but a source of books. And only Ethan saw in her what she hid beneath all those layers. A girl who played the flute at 7 and was happy before the world decided she was a genius. On her 6th visit, Lyra arrived in a bad mood. She was silent. She drank tea. She didn't speak. Yuna asked what was wrong. Lyra said nothing. Yuna said nothing ever happens. Lyra remained silent. Then, an hour later, she said that the House of Ivorn had held a council yesterday, that they had discussed her marriage, that she was 17 and, according to tradition, an heiress must be betrothed by 18, that the candidate is the heir to House Corvin, rank S, 24 years old. She'd seen him twice, both times at formal receptions. He's handsome. He's polite. He looks at her like she's a thoroughbred horse, appraising her. He imagines the offspring. Lyra said this in an even voice, without anger, with the weariness of someone who knows that arguing is pointless. Yuna opened her mouth to say something sharp, but Nona shook her head, and Yuna closed her mouth. Ethan was silent. He couldn't solve this problem. He couldn't fix a system that traded people like objects. But he could do one thing. That evening, after Lyra had left, Ethan took out of his inventory the card he'd seen a week ago. The silver comb of the singer Terran, the 7th century before the fall. A woman wearing this comb in her hair hears not the words, but the speaker's intent, the keeper's condition. To turn down a lucrative offer for the sake of an inconvenient but correct decision. That was the condition of archivist Geln's wooden measuring spoon. But the system worked this way. A single condition could unlock different items if the essence matched, Ethan thought. He had been offered a benefit. Lord Bracken had hinted, last week, that he might recommend a shop to the official Craftsmen's Guild. A license, protection, status. But in return, Ethan would have to repair only what the guild approved. No artifacts, no suspicious items, only household repairs. It was profitable. It was safe. It was wrong. Because a guild license meant submission to a system that divided people into ranks and decided who was worthy and who was not. Ethan refused. He wrote Lord Bracken a polite letter. He thanked him. He said he wasn't ready yet. The Lord replied that he understood, but that the offer still stood. The interface flashed. The keeper's condition was met. But not for the spoon, for the comb. Singer Terran's silver comb is available. Ethan took it out. Small, slender. The silver had tarnished. The prongs were bent. On the rim was a pattern of intertwined musical notes. Ethan closed his eyes. He saw it. A woman on stage. A dark hall. She was singing. The comb in her hair caught the sound of her voice and reflected it into the hall. But not just the sound. The feeling. When the singer sang of love, the hall felt love. When she sang of sorrow, the hall wept. The comb was an amplifier not of the voice, but of the truth. Ethan straightened the teeth. He polished the silver. The pattern emerged more clearly. Notes in silver. The comb was whole. Ethan knew who it was for. For the girl being married off to a man who looked at her as if she were a thoroughbred horse, so that she would hear not the words, but what lay behind them, so that no one could lie to her anymore. Lyra came 2 days later. Ethan called her to the counter. He took out the comb, placed it before her, told her it was for her. Lyra looked at the comb, then at Ethan. She asked what it was. Ethan said it was a comb, that if she put it in her hair, she would hear not people's words but their intentions, that it would help her at the council, and at meetings with her fiancé. Lyra took the comb, turned it over in her fingers, put it in her hair, froze, looked at Ethan. He saw her eyes widen. She heard, not his words, his intention. He didn't know exactly what she had heard, but her face changed. It softened. She took the comb out, placed it on the counter. She was silent for a moment. Then she said quietly that his intention was very warm. Ethan said nothing. Lyra picked up the comb, put it in her bag, said she'd wear it at the next council meeting. She left. At the door, she turned around. She looked at him with a lingering gaze, then at Una, who was standing by the wall with her arms crossed. Then she left. Una waited until the footsteps faded. She turned to Ethan. She said that if he were to give her a gift, it should be something practical, not romantic. Ethan said he would give her a new apron. Una threw a rag at him. That same evening, Ji-hee sat down at the table with Ethan. Her face was serious. She said she had found something in the book Lyra had brought. The treatise described magic prior to the rank system, and it mentioned a term Ji-hee had seen before. The Remembrancers, not magicians. The Remembrancers. People who didn't create magic but recalled it through objects, through a connection with things, through the fact that an object remembers what it was made for. The treatise claimed that before the 7 houses, there were no ranks. There was no stone of origin. There was only the ability to remember, and everyone had their own. Ji-hee said that if this was true, then the entire ranking system was not a law of nature, but a political decision. Someone 300 years ago decided to replace memory with power. And won. Ethan listened and thought about the stone of origin, about how it hadn't lit up when Ethan placed his hand on it. The stone was searching for mana. It didn't find any. It showed 0. But what if the stone wasn't looking for the right thing? What if the stone was deliberately programmed not to detect another form of magic? Not a mistake. Censorship. Ji-hee jotted this down in her notebook. 4 exclamation marks. Ethan stepped out into the courtyard. Night, stars, cold air. 4 months since his exile. He has a shop. He has people. He has work. He has enemies he cannot yet see but can sense. Somewhere in Silverbrook, Professor Vale is reading reports about a strange master in the lower quarter. Somewhere at the headquarters of the Order of Pure Mana, someone is raising the question of a reinvestigation. Somewhere in the Archmage's council chamber, someone knows that the cube from the chapel has been activated. Ethan stood and looked at the stars and thought that silence is never eternal, that they would come for him soon, and that when they came, he had to be ready, not stronger, more prepared. He went back inside, sat down at the table, opened his inventory, looked at the cards. 12 items available, 4 restored. 3 given away, 1 on cooldown. 8 more waiting. 8 conditions. 8 choices. 8 things he must do right to be ready for what is coming. He closed the inventory. He lay down. He closed his eyes. Behind the wall, Nona was washing dishes. Yuna was humming. Jihei was rustling through pages. Mary had been asleep for a long time. His people. His home. His weak spot. He fell asleep with that thought. And he dreamed of light at the bottom of the world. Warm, tired, waiting. Winter came early. The first snow fell on the roofs of the lower quarter in early November. Ethan stood by the shop window and watched as white covered gray. 5 months since the exile. The shop was open every day. There was just enough money for rent and food. Barely. In winter, people carried fewer things. In winter, people spent their money on firewood and bread, not on repairs. Ethan knew it would be hard, but he hadn't expected the trouble to come from that direction. The letter appeared under the shop door on Monday morning, unsigned, unstamped. 2 sentences on expensive paper in neat handwriting. Master Hale was ordered to cease operations within 7 days. Otherwise, operations would be shut down by other means. Ethan read it. He passed it to Alyssa, who had just come in for her morning rounds. Alyssa read it. Her expression didn't change. She said the paper was from Silverbrook. That this kind is sold only at the academic shop. That the handwriting was calligraphic, not written by a student, a professor. Ethan asked what she recommended. Alyssa said it was technically a threat, that she could file a case, but that a case against Silverbrook in the lower quarter would be a dead letter. The courts are decided by rank. She could provide security for a week. 1 guard. That was all she had. Ethan nodded. He said 1 was enough. The guard stood at the shop door for 3 days. On the 4th day, he was recalled. Orders from above. Alyssa came by that evening. She said the order came from the chief of the city guard. Personally. No explanation. She said it meant there was pressure from above, that someone in Silverbrook had influence over the guard's command. Ethan wasn't surprised. He'd been expecting it. Vale. Professor Cassius Vale. For 7 years, Ethan had watched him at the academy. Vale wasn't a bad man. He was a man who had built his career on a single idea. The idea that rank determines worth. That magical power is measurable and objective. That the stone of origin is never wrong. Ethan's very existence was a personal affront to that idea. A boy with a 0 on his arm who does what mages cannot. Every repaired object, every child healed, every person who came to the shop instead of the academy. All of this was a crack in the foundation upon which Vale stood. On the 5th day after the letter, a carriage pulled up to the shop. Black. Bearing the Silverbrook crest. 3 people stepped out. 2 assistants in robes, and between them, Professor Cassius Vale. Ethan was seeing him for the first time in 6 months. Vale had aged, or perhaps Ethan hadn't noticed before. Worn face, sharp nose, gray eyes, cold, but not cruel. Tired. Vale entered the shop. He looked around. He saw the instruments, the counter, the samovar, Mary in the corner, Yuna by the wall, Jihei at the table with a notebook. He looked at Jihei a little longer than at the others. Then he looked at Ethan. He said he had come in person because the letter hadn't worked. He said that Ethan was engaged in dangerous activities, that the items he uses are illegal artifacts of unknown origin, that the Order of Pure Mana has grounds for an investigation, that the Academy is ready to offer an alternative. If Ethan hands over all the artifacts to them for study, the shop will be able to continue operating as a regular craft workshop, without artifacts, without miracles, without rumors. Ethan listened. He was silent. Then he asked one thing. He asked Vale if he knew that his sister used to draw. Vale stopped. His face turned to stone. He asked how Ethan knew about his sister. Ethan said he knew because things remember. That in one of the artifacts he had restored, there was a trace. Not an object, a memory. A young woman who drew with charcoal on the walls of her room because she wasn't given paper. Who received a 0 at the ceremony and stopped drawing a year later. And 2 years later, stopped living. Vale stood motionless. The assistants behind him exchanged glances. Ethan continued. He said that Vale had spent 30 years proving that the ranking system was objective and fair. That his sister had been correctly rejected. That a 0 on the arm meant a 0 in the person. Because if that wasn't the case, if rank didn't determine worth, then his sister had died in vain. And he could have saved her. And he didn't. The silence in the shop was so thick you could hear the wick crackling in the lamp. Vale stood there. He looked at Ethan. His face was white. His hands were clenched into fists. Then he turned and walked out. His assistants followed him. The carriage drove away. Ethan stood at the counter, breathing. His hands were shaking. He wasn't sure he'd done the right thing. He'd struck at the most vulnerable spot of a man who had the power to destroy him. Nona came out of the kitchen. She set a cup of tea in front of him. She said he was either a genius or a fool. Ethan said he was more likely the latter. Nona said that fools live longer. Ethan didn't smile. He knew that Vale would return, or send someone, or do something. A man whose wound has been poked doesn't go away quietly. He either heals or destroys the one who poked him. 3 days later, a messenger arrived at the shop. Not from Silverbrook, from House Ivorn. A note from Lyra, a short one. She wrote that Vale had filed an official request with the Archmage's Council to seize all illegal artifacts from the shop in the lower quarter, that the hearing was in 10 days, that she was trying to delay in 7 days, but her father didn't want to get involved, that Ethan needed a plan. Ethan read the note, folded it, put it in his pocket, looked at his hands. At 0, 10 days, he needed a plan. Not a battle plan, a repair plan. Because it wasn't Ethan who was broken, nor the shop. It was Vale who was broken. He spent 2 days in the inventory, searching, sifting through cards, reading descriptions, matching dates and names, cross-referencing. His main tool: connections between objects, ornaments that repeat, materials that matched, names that popped up on different cards. He was looking for one specific thing, and he found it. A card in the far corner of the inventory, faded, almost illegible, the charcoal pencil of the artist Elara, the 9th century before the fall. A line drawn with this pencil does not erase or fade. The drawing preserves the artist's mood forever. Condition: lost. Location: unknown. Keeper's condition: undefined. Ethan stared at the card. Elara, an artist, an object that preserves the artist's mood. He could not obtain this pencil. Condition: undetermined. Location: unknown. But he did not need the pencil. He needed information. The artist Elara lived 900 years before the fall, 1,200 years before the present day, and she drew. In the civilization of the Rememberers, drawing was a form of magic. Every drawing carried a mood. Every line remembered the hand. Vale's sister received a 0 on the Stone of Origin, but she drew. What if her drawings were not just drawings? What if she was a rememberer and didn't know it? Ethan asked Jihei to look in Lyra's book. Jihei searched all night. By morning, she found it. A chapter on visual forms of memory. A drawing as a record of intent. The treatise stated that the rememberers had different gifts. Some worked with objects, others with plants, still others with drawings, a fourth group with music, a fifth with food. The caste system did not distinguish between these forms. The Stone of Origin sought only mana, raw, measurable, that glows and clangs. Everything else received a 0. Ethan knew what he had to do. He didn't need to defeat Vale. He needed to get his sister back. 8 days until the hearing. Ethan was working. Not on artifacts, on a search. He needed Vale's sister's drawings, if they had survived. If no one had destroyed them. If Vale hadn't burned them himself. He asked Alyssa for help. Alyssa didn't ask why. She asked for a name. Ethan said, Ma Margaret Vale, died 23 years ago, rank 0, listed as under the care of her brother Cassius Vale. Alyssa left. She returned 2 days later. She had found a record in the city archives. Margaret Vale, died at the age of 19, cause of death not specified, estate transferred to her brother, inventory of estate, clothing, books, art supplies. Alyssa added that according to the storage registry, Margaret Vale's personal belongings had been transferred to the Silverbrook basement storage 22 years ago. Box number 317. Never claimed. Ethan stared at the box number. 317. The Silverbrook basement. A place where he was forbidden entry. A place where the 0 on his arm locked every door. He thought about it for a day. Then he went to find Lyra. He found her in the garden of Yvorne House. She was sitting on a bench and playing the flute. She stopped when she saw him. Ethan said he needed help, that he needed to get into the Silverbrook basement. Lyra asked why. Ethan told her. About Margaret, about the drawings, about the plan. Lyra listened in silence. Then she said it was madness, that if he were caught in the academy's basement after being expelled, it would be considered trespassing, that the punishment was prison. Ethan said he knew. Lyra looked at him. Then she stood up. She said she had a pass to the library building, that the basement storage was under the library, that she could get him in as her assistant, that for that he would need a robe, that she would get the robe. Ethan said she was taking a risk. Lyra said she was the heiress of House Yvorne, rank SS, and that if anyone dared to stop her assistant, she would cause a scandal that would make the council's ears ring for a month. Ethan looked at her. She wasn't joking. They went the next day, early in the morning. Lyra in an academic robe with the Yvorne crest. Ethan in a robe without a crest that Lyra had pulled from someone's closet. Hood pulled down over his face, hands in gloves, 0 hidden. They walked through the main gate. Lyra showed her pass. The guard nodded. He didn't look at Ethan. Assistants to the heirs of the great houses don't attract attention. They walked across the courtyard. Ethan looked at the walls he remembered from 7 years ago. The stained glass windows, the tapestries, the stone that was older than the building. He felt something strange. Not nostalgia, detachment. This place had spat him out. He had returned not to stay, but to take what did not belong to him, but belonged to the one who was no longer here. The basement storage room was cold and dark. Rows of wooden boxes on shelves, dust, cobwebs, the smell of old paper and dry wood. Lyra stayed by the door. She looked down the hallway. Ethan walked along the shelves. Numbers on the boxes. 200, 250, 300, 310, 317. He stopped. The box was small, wooden, unlocked. He opened the lid. Inside was a stack of paper tied with twine, a stub of a charcoal pencil, a brush with dried bristles, and drawings, dozens of drawings. Ethan took out the stack, untied the twine. The first drawing, a tree on a hill, charcoal on yellow paper. Simple, but not simple. Ethan looked and felt. The wind, the smell of grass, the warmth of the sun on his skin. The drawing carried a mood. Margaret Vale didn't just draw a tree. She drew a day when she was happy. And the drawing remembered. 23 years later, the drawing still remembered. Ethan flipped through the sheets. A house with a garden, a cat on the windowsill, a boy with a book. A boy. Young Cassius. Margaret drew her brother. He was sitting at a table with an open book and smiling. Ethan looked at the drawing and saw. Young Vale, before his career, before the theory, before he decided that rank determined worth. He was smiling. Margaret had drawn him smiling, and the drawing remembered that smile. Ethan put the drawings back, tied the string. He tucked the stack under his arm. He closed the drawer. He returned to Lyra. They left the vault, the library, the academy. They walked through the gate. The guard didn't look up. On the street, Lyra stopped. She looked at Ethan. She asked if he had found what he was looking for. Ethan said he had. He took out one drawing. He showed it to Lyra. A boy with a book. Lyra looked at it. She asked who it was. Ethan said it was Cassius Vale at 15. Lyra looked at the drawing. Then she said quietly that he looked like a normal person. Ethan said that he had been normal, before he decided that normality was a flaw. There were 6 days left until the hearing. Ethan was preparing, not for his defense, for the conversation. He went through all of Margaret's drawings, 32 sheets, 32 moments of happiness recorded in charcoal on paper. Each one carried a mood, each one remembered. It was magic, not mana, not rank, not power. Memory. Margaret Vale was a remembrancer. Her gift worked through drawing. The Stone of Origin didn't see this because it wasn't tuned to see it. It was looking for mana. He found nothing, and that nothing killed her. Not right away, slowly. Through years of silence and invisibility. Through a world that told her she was nothing. Ethan sat at the table and looked at the drawings. Nona approached. She looked over his shoulder. She saw the drawing with the cat. She said that whoever drew this, that person loved cats. Ethan said that this person loved everything. It's just that no one noticed. The interface flashed. The card for Kenneth the Watchman's bronze lantern. The condition: to illuminate what someone is hiding in the darkness. Margaret's drawings had lain in a dark box in the basement for 23 years. Ethan brought them into the light. Condition fulfilled. Lantern available. Ethan took it out. Small. Bronze. The panels were bent. The glass was cracked. Inside were the remains of a wick. He restored it in an hour. Straightened the panels. Replaced the glass with a shard from an old window pane that Una had found. Inserted a new wick made of cotton thread. The lantern was whole. The flame inside doesn't go out in the wind. It reveals hidden inscriptions within a 10-foot radius. Ethan lit the lantern. He held it up to Margaret's drawing, and he saw. Letters appeared in the margins of the drawing, thin, barely visible. Margaret wrote in the margins of her drawings, with invisible ink, or not with ink, with a mood. Her words were recorded the same way as the drawings, through memory, through intention. Ethan read. Short phrases. Today Cassius said he's proud of me. I drew his smile while I still remember. Tomorrow is the ceremony. I'm scared. If the stone says I'm nothing, I don't know how to go on living. Ethan paused, set the lantern aside, closed his eyes, breathed, then continued. The stone said 0. Cassius isn't looking at me. I'm drawing, but the drawings are gray now. I'm cold. I'm cold all the time. Ethan folded up the drawings. He put the lantern away in his inventory. He sat down in the darkness. He knew now. He knew for sure. What he would tell Vale tomorrow. And he knew it would hurt. For both of them. With Lyra's help, Ethan sneaked into the Silverbrook basement and found Margaret Vale's drawings. The drawings carried the artist's mood, proving that Margaret was a remembrancer who channeled magic through her art. Ethan fulfilled the condition of the bronze lantern and discovered Margaret's hidden notes in the margins of the drawings. The notes confirmed that 0 had broken her at the ceremony, the day of the hearing, the Archmage's council chamber in the upper wing of Silverbrook. A high ceiling with frescoes, a long table made of dark wood, with 7 chairs. 5 are occupied, 2 are empty. Ethan stood in the center of the hall. Next to him was Alyssa in her guard uniform. Behind him, by the wall, stood Ji-hye with a notebook. Lyra, in the robes of House Ivorn, sat in the gallery for observers. Yuna remained in the pew with Nona and Mary. Ethan had asked them not to come. Yuna argued for 20 minutes. Nona said one word, "No." Yuna fell silent. Vale sat on the right side of the table. His face was stony. A stack of documents lay before him. 2 assistants stood nearby. He didn't look at Ethan. He looked at the table. The chairman of the council, Archmage Renar Travis. An old man with a white beard and heavy rings on every finger. Rank SS. His voice was quiet, but that made the air still. He read the summons. Professor Vale's request for the seizure of illegal artifacts. Charges of using unregistered magical items. Charges of practicing magic without a license or rank. Ethan listened. Every word was a brick in the wall that Vale had been building for 7 years. A wall between the world and the truth. Vale stood up. He spoke for 20 minutes, calmly, logically, professionally. He described the incidents. The girl with gray fever, the seamstress's needle, the mirror, the comb. He said that each of these cases constituted the use of unclassified magic outside the rank system. That this set a precedent, that if a 0-rank mage could do what Ethan Hale does, then the rank system loses its meaning. That this was a threat to public order. That the artifacts must be confiscated and turned over for study. That Ethan Hale must be restricted in his activities. He sat down. The archmages exchanged glances. Renar Travis turned to Ethan. He asked what he had to say in his defense. Ethan did not defend himself. He pulled a stack of paper from his bosom. 32 sheets. He placed them on the table in front of the archmages. He said these were drawings by Margaret Vale, Professor Vale's sister, rank 0. She died 23 years ago. The room fell silent. Vale raised his head, his eyes wide open. Ethan spoke calmly. He said that every drawing carried the artist's mood, that anyone in the room could pick up a drawing and feel it, that this was magic, not mana, not rank, a different kind of magic, older than the Stone of Origin, older than the rank system, the magic of memory, the magic of those who remember. Margaret Vale was not a 0. She was a different kind of mage, the kind the stone cannot see, a type that this system discards, a type that dies in silence because they were told they were nothing. Renar Travis took one drawing, a tree on a hill. He looked at it. His eyebrows rose. He passed the drawing to his neighbor. The neighbor looked at it, put it on the table. He took another. The drawings were passed around. Each archmage took a sheet and froze for a second. Each one felt it. The wind, the sun, the warmth, the sadness, the joy. The 23-year-old drawings by a dead girl spoke louder in the council chamber than any SS mage. Vale sat motionless. His hands lay on the table. He wasn't looking at the drawings. He was staring into space. Ethan took out the last drawing, a boy with a book, young Cassius, smiling. He placed it in front of Vale. He said quietly, "She loved you. There's no shame in that." Vale looked at the drawing, at his face from 20 years ago, at the smile his sister had captured and preserved. His hands trembled. He picked up the drawing, held it. The room was silent. Then Vale stood up, said he was withdrawing the request, said he needed time, turned and walked out. The assistants ran after him. The room remained silent for another minute. Then Renar Travis cleared his throat. He said the hearing was adjourned, that the request had been withdrawn, that the artifacts would remain with the owner. He looked at Ethan for a long time. Then he said the council would like to see Master Hale at the next meeting, to continue the conversation. Ethan nodded. He left the room. Lyra was waiting for him in the hallway. She didn't say anything. She just walked beside him. Behind them was Ji-hye. Behind them was Alyssa. They left Silverbrook in silence. 4 people. Snow was falling outside. Ethan stopped. He lifted his face to the sky. Snowflakes fell on his skin. Cold. Pure. He closed his eyes. Margaret. He hadn't known her when she was alive. But now he had done for her what no one had done 23 years ago. He showed the world who she was. It was quiet in the shop that evening. Nona had made soup. Una sliced the bread into even pieces with a knife that no longer trembled in her hands. Mary was drawing in the corner. Jihei was writing. Lyra had come uninvited, in a simple dress, without a robe. Alyssa stopped by after her shift. 6 people at one table. Ethan sat eating soup and thought that victory didn't feel like victory. It felt like the silence after a storm, like the first breath after a long dive. Nona looked at him across the table. She said the soup was getting cold. Ethan ate. Winter was retreating. March brought rain instead of snow. The repair and tea shop had become something more than just a shop. People came not only with things, they came with questions, with problems, with children who had received a low rank at the ceremony, with teenagers who feared the stone would give them a 0, with artisans whom the guild would not accept, with herbalists whom the order considered heretics. Ethan couldn't help everyone. He repaired things, not people. But people came and sat down at the table with tea and left feeling lighter. Nona said it was the samovar's fault, that the tea from her husband's samovar healed not the body but something else. Ethan didn't argue. 2 weeks after the hearing, Vale came to see him, alone, without assistance, without a robe, in a plain coat. He had aged even more. Or perhaps he had stopped hiding his age. He walked into the shop, looked around. He saw the samovar on the counter. He saw Mary with the drawing. He saw Una with a tray of cups. He sat down at the table. He was silent. Nona set tea in front of him. He drank. Then he said he had resigned, that he was leaving the department, that he had nothing left to teach, that for 30 years his theory had been a lie, and he knew it, but couldn't admit it because the admission was too costly. It cost Margaret. Ethan listened, didn't interrupt. Vale took the drawing out of his coat pocket. A boy with a book, his own face. He placed it on the table, said he'd taken it from the faculty lounge, that he couldn't leave it there. Ethan nodded. He said the drawing was his, that Margaret had drawn it for Cassius, that it belonged to him. Vale looked at the drawing, then at Ethan. He said one word. Thank you. He stood up. He left. He stopped at the door. He turned around. He said that if Ethan needed a theorist, he knew the rank system better than anyone alive. And he knew where the holes were in it. Ethan said he'd think about it. Vale left. Nona watched him go. She said that this man was broken. Ethan said yes, but that broken things were his specialty. Spring was gaining strength. Hale's house, that's what they started calling it. Not Ethan, the people. At first as a joke, then seriously. Hale's house on the corner of Chestnut and Crooked. A place where they fix things and drink tea. A place where 0 doesn't mean nobody. Ethan resisted the name for 2 weeks. Then he gave in. Jihei filed the paperwork to register a craft guild. Not through the official guild chamber, which would have rejected it. Through an old law that Lyra found in the Ivorn library. A law predating the rank system. Any 6 citizens can register a guild association under the right of first assembly. No one repealed the law. It was simply forgotten. Just as people forget things that are inconvenient. 6 signatures. Ethan, Nona, Una, Jihei, Meg Torin, Brother Dominic. 6 people. House Hale. Registered. Legal. Exists. Summer. The first tournament of the great houses in Ethan's memory. He knew about the tournaments from the academy. Once a year, 7 houses, magical duels, a display of power. A celebration for the strong, a nightmare for the weak. House Hale couldn't participate as a combat unit. None of its members were fighters. But Lyra suggested something else. According to the tournament rules, each house can enter a field restorer, a master who repairs equipment between rounds. Usually it's a ceremonial position. No one pays attention. Ethan signed up. The tournament took place in the Silverbrook Arena. Thousands of spectators, stands, flags. The first day was boring. Minor duels. Ethan sat in the field restorer's tent, repairing cracked shields and bent swords. No one looked his way. On the second day, everything changed. In the semifinals, the heir to House Ivorn, Kalis Ivorn, Lyra's older brother, took a blow to the chest. The magical shield held, his body did not. Kalis fell. The court healers rushed over. They stopped the bleeding, but the damage was deeper. Internal bleeding. Healing magic closed the wounds on the outside, but inside the blood continued to flow. The healers exchanged glances. The chief physician of House Ivorn said that surgery was needed, that there were no instruments for such an operation here, that he needed to be taken to the capital's hospital, that it was a 2-hour journey to the hospital, that Kalis wouldn't survive. Lyra stood at the edge of the arena, pale as a sheet. Ethan approached her. He told her to take him to his brother. Lyra looked at him. She didn't ask anything. She led the way. The House of Avorn's tent. Kalis was lying on the table, pale, sweat on his forehead. Healers bustled about. The chief physician looked at Ethan, at the brand, opened his mouth to expel him. Lyra said one word, "Let him." The physician closed his mouth. Ethan approached the table, looked at Kalis, then closed his eyes, opened his inventory. Aaron's Field Healer's Protective Bracelet, the 4th century before the fall, the condition. To protect the one it would be easier to leave behind. Kalis Ivorn, heir to a house that for centuries had sent low-ranking people to their deaths in the dungeons. Heir to the system that killed Margaret Vale. Heir to everything Ethan stood against. It was easier to leave him behind. It was easier to look away. The system was waiting. Ethan could feel its gaze, cold, precise. It saw his intent. It could not be deceived. He looked at Kalis. He looked at Lyra, who stood nearby, holding her brother's hand. He wasn't saving the heir to House Ivorn. He was saving Lyra's brother. The condition accepted. The bracelet materialized in his hand. Warm leather, with bronze plates. Ethan slipped the bracelet onto Kalis's wrist. The bracelet glowed, quietly. No flash, no thunder. A warm, golden light washed over Kalis's body. The bleeding stopped. Color returned to his face. Kalis opened his eyes. He looked at Ethan, then at the bracelet on his wrist, then at his sister. Lyra was crying. Silently. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. The chief physician stood with his mouth agape. Then he approached, checked his pulse, examined the wound, said the bleeding had stopped, that the wound was closing, that it was impossible. Ethan removed the bracelet, stowed it in his inventory. A 14-day cooldown. He stood up. He walked toward the exit. Archmage Renar Travis stood at the tent's entrance. He had seen everything. He looked at Ethan, then at Kalis, then back at Ethan. He said nothing. He stepped aside. Ethan walked out. The arena was buzzing. The news of the Zero who had saved the heir of Ivorn had spread in minutes. Silverbrook Academy officially invited him back that very evening, via a messenger, with the rector's seal. Ethan read the invitation. He placed it on the table, wrote a reply. One word. No. 2 years. 730 days since that morning when he emerged from under the bridge and found the chapel. Ethan stood by the window of Hale House and looked out onto the street. Morning light. Autumn. Leaves on the pavement. Hale House now occupied both floors of the former dye house and the annex in the courtyard. The workshop on the ground floor. Jihee's library on the second floor. Nona's kitchen in the annex. Mary's room with drawings on every wall. Yuna's corner with shelves for the dishes she no longer broke. Alyssa's study, where she wrote reports in the evenings. Lyra's room. Small, with a simple bed and a flute on the windowsill. She had moved in 3 months ago, quietly, without a fuss. She simply arrived with a single bag and said she no longer wanted to live in a house where people spoke to her in numbers. Her father had sent a letter. Lyra didn't open it. The first seal of the old gods finally cracked in July. Ethan knew about it before anyone else. The inventory showed it. The cards began to flash. New items appeared every day. Dozens. Hundreds. The system was waking up. Remembering. Something was stirring at the bottom of the world. Not a monster. Not a catastrophe. A call. Quiet. Insistent. Ethan heard it in his sleep. A voice without words. A feeling without form. Someone was waiting. Someone was calling.